My name is Sarah Ellison. I'm 32 years old. For 7 years, I had worked at the manufacturing plant in Greenville, South Carolina, handling process improvement and quality documentation. I kept records, caught errors before they reached the line, and quietly made the numbers look better on paper than they had any right to. My boss, Michael Stanton, had a habit of presenting those improvements in meetings as his own. When something went wrong that he had ordered, the HR manager, Deborah Lang, wrote it up as my failure to communicate clearly. I never raised my voice about it. There was no point. People in charge rewrite events to fit the story they need, and the rest of us are expected to nod along. On Tuesday morning in early September, the plant was already running hot. A major order for a defense contractor was behind schedule. My boss had pushed the team to skip two of the final inspection steps to meet the ship date. I had put the objection in an email and copied the quality manager. He replied that we would adjust the paperwork after the fact. That was the exact phrase he used. The client's audit team was scheduled to arrive in 48 hours. I was called into the conference room at 9:15. My boss sat at the head of the table. Deborah Lang from HR sat to his right with a folder already open. Two other supervisors were there, both looking at their phones. No one offered me a chair until I pulled one out myself. "We have a problem with the documentation on this run," my boss said. His voice was flat, the same tone he used when he wanted everyone to know he was being reasonable. "The client is going to ask why certain checkpoints were bypassed. You signed off on the final checklist. That puts the responsibility on you." I looked at the printed checklist in front of him. My initials were there, but the date had been changed in pen. The change was not in my handwriting. "I signed the version that still had the two inspection points," I said. "The one you told me to update after the fact is the one that went to the floor." Deborah Lang slid a different sheet across the table. "This is the version in the system now. Your electronic signature is on it. We pulled the audit trail this morning." I did not argue. I had learned years earlier that arguing only gave them more lines to write down. I noted the time on my phone. 9:22 a.m. Then I opened the voice memo app and started a new recording. I set the phone face down on the table like I was just resting my hand. My boss continued, "You're going to be the one walking the auditors through the corrective actions. We've already told them you own the process documentation. If they have questions about why things were rushed, you explain it as a resource issue on your end. That keeps the plant out of a formal finding." Deborah Lang nodded once. "We'll need a written statement from you by end of day tomorrow. Something that shows you understand where the breakdown happened and what you're doing to prevent it. HR will keep a copy in your file." One of the supervisors finally looked up. He said nothing. He just watched me the way people watch someone who has already been decided on. I asked if I was still on the project distribution list. My boss said the project lead had asked to narrow the core team for the audit. My name had been removed that morning. I would get the public updates, nothing internal. That was how they left me standing on the side of the road, professionally speaking. No access to the real information, no seat at the table where decisions were being made, and my name already attached to the version of events they wanted the client to see. The meeting ended at 9:41. I walked back to my desk in the quality office, a small room with two other people who kept their heads down when I passed. I closed the door, sat down and checked my email. There was nothing from the project lead. The last message I had received from anyone on that thread was from the day before. At 10:07, a new message arrived from Deborah Lang. It was addressed to my boss. The subject line read, "R.E. Ellison, Performance Documentation." She had not put my name in the CC field, but she had replied, all by mistake, to a thread that still included me from an earlier unrelated exchange. I opened it. The first paragraph said they needed to move faster on the performance management plan because the client audit was a good opportunity to document ongoing issues. The second paragraph listed 3 bullet points: history of attitude concerns, failure to meet revised deadlines, and resistance to process changes directed by leadership. None of those things were in any write-up I had ever seen. The third paragraph said once the audit was over, they could move to a final written warning and begin the separation timeline before the end of the fiscal year. I read it twice. Then I forwarded the entire thread to myself at a personal address and deleted the forward from my sent items. I did not reply to anyone. Andre Fields worked 2 desks over in the same open area. He was quiet, kept to himself, and had been there longer than me. Around 11:30, he walked past my desk on the way to the break room and stopped. "You got pulled into that meeting this morning?" he said, not quite a question. I told him what had been said about me presenting to the auditors and being removed from the internal list. He looked at the floor for a second. They did something similar with the last quality lead who pushed back on the overtime numbers. She ended up writing her own exit paperwork 6 months later. I asked him if he had ever seen the performance file they kept on people. He said he had not, but the IT person who handled access requests. Victoria Lane sometimes mentioned how often HR pulled old emails when they were building a case. He did not say anything else. He just nodded once and kept walking. I sat at my desk until lunch. The plant floor noise came through the walls in a steady mechanical rhythm. I opened the voice memo again and recorded a short note to myself, date, time, what was said in the meeting, and the exact wording from the email I was not supposed to see. I did not raise my voice. I did not add any commentary about how it felt. I just stated the facts out loud so the recording would have them in my own voice. By 1:15, the internal project folder had been updated. My name was gone from the contributor list. A new document had been uploaded with a revised timeline that made it look like the inspection skips had been my recommendation. The metadata showed it was created by my boss's account at 11:48 that morning. I downloaded a copy before the permissions changed again. That evening, I drove home the same way I always did, through the same intersection with the same traffic light that took 40 seconds longer than it should have. I did not turn on the radio. I thought about the email sitting in my personal account and the recording on my phone. I thought about how many times over the past 7 years I had signed documents I knew were incomplete because someone higher up told me it was temporary and would be fixed later. I thought about how many of those later fixes had never happened. I did not feel angry. Anger is useful for short bursts. What I felt was colder and more useful. I had spent years letting them rewrite the record because I believed the work itself would eventually speak for me. It had not. The only thing that had ever changed their behavior was when something threatened the contracts or the bonuses. I decided I would keep recording every conversation that involved the audit or my name. I would not announce it. I would not threaten anyone. I would simply collect the version of events they were building and keep the original alongside it. The next morning, the client auditors arrived at 8 o'clock. My boss introduced me to them in the lobby as the person who would walk them through the documentation. He smiled when he said it. Deborah Lang stood beside him with her hands folded in front of her. She did not look at me. I shook their hands. I carried the folder they had given me. I did not correct anything my boss said during the introduction. I had already decided that silence was no longer the safer option. It only protected the people who had written the story before I ever opened my mouth. The auditors were already waiting in the small conference room when we arrived. My boss gestured for me to sit at the end of the table nearest the door. Deborah Lang took the seat directly across from me. The two auditors, a man and a woman in business casual, opened their laptops and placed a printed copy of the revised checklist between us. My boss began by explaining that the plant had experienced a temporary resource constraint on the final inspection steps. He said the decision had been made at the quality level to balance schedule and compliance. He looked at me when he said it. I opened the voice memo app again under the table and started recording. The auditors asked for the original version of the checklist and the changelog. My boss said the system showed the current document as the authoritative one. He added that I had been responsible for maintaining the records. The woman auditor asked me directly whether I had recommended skipping the 2 checkpoints. I said the recommendation had come from operations to meet the customer ship date. My boss interrupted before I could finish and said the quality team had signed off without raising formal concerns at the time. Deborah Lang nodded and made a note on her legal pad. She did not look at me while she wrote. The audit continued for 3 hours. Every time a question pointed to a process gap, my boss redirected it toward documentation ownership. Every time the auditors asked for supporting emails or meeting notes, Deborah Lang produced a slim folder that contained only the versions that had already been revised. The original messages I had sent, objecting to the shortcuts, were not in that folder. At 11:40, the auditors requested a short break. My boss and Deborah Lang stepped into the hallway. I stayed at the table and opened my work email on my phone. A new message had arrived from the project distribution list. It was a summary of the morning's discussion prepared by my boss for the client. My name appeared only once in a sentence that read, "Quality confirmed the corrective actions are in progress under Sarah Ellison's oversight." I forwarded that message to my personal account as well. When the auditors returned, the man asked whether the plant had conducted any internal review of the decision to bypass the inspections. My boss said a review had been completed internally and the findings were already incorporated into the corrective action plan I would be presenting. He did not mention that I had been removed from the internal distribution list that same morning. I answered the remaining questions in short, factual sentences. I did not volunteer anything beyond what was asked. When the session ended at 1:15, the auditors thanked everyone and said they would return the following day for a walkthrough of the production floor and a review of the raw data logs. My boss waited until the auditors had left the building before he spoke to me again. "You handled that well enough," he said. "Tomorrow you'll walk them through the floor and answer any follow-up questions about the documentation. Keep your answers short. If they ask about the original process, tell them the revised version is what matters now." Deborah Lang added that she would need my written statement by 4 p.m. that day. She said it should focus on lessons learned and the steps I was taking to strengthen oversight going forward. She used the word oversight twice. I told her I would have it ready. I went back to my desk and closed the door. Andre was at his station. He did not look over. I typed the statement exactly as they had framed it. I accepted responsibility for the documentation gaps, noted the pressure of the schedule, and listed 3 generic improvements I would implement. I did not mention the emails I had sent or the verbal instructions I had received. I saved it as a draft and did not send it. At 2:30, Victoria Lane from IT appeared in the doorway. She was carrying a tablet and wearing the same neutral expression she always wore when she had to deliver bad news about system access. "HR put a note on your account this morning," she said quietly. "They flagged your login for review. It means they can see every file you open and every email you send internally. I'm not supposed to tell you, but I thought you should know before tomorrow." I asked her if she could tell whether anything had already been pulled from my account. She said she could not see the content of what they reviewed, only that a request had been logged at 10:12 a.m. She hesitated, then added that she had noticed a separate request earlier in the week for old project archives from 3 years ago. Those archives included the efficiency reports I had written that my boss had later presented as his own work. I thanked her. She nodded once and left. I opened the voice memo again and recorded what she had said, including the exact times. Then I walked to the break room for water. On the way back, I passed the main bulletin board near the front offices. A new printed email had been tacked up. It was an internal announcement about the client visit and the team that had supported it. My name was not listed. The names of 2 supervisors who had done almost no work on the project were there instead. I took a photograph of the announcement with my phone and kept walking. At 3:45, I sent the statement to Deborah Lang exactly as I had drafted it. She replied within 4 minutes, thanking me for my cooperation and confirming it would be placed in my file. At 4:10, my boss appeared at my desk. He closed the door behind him. "The auditors are coming back tomorrow at 8, he said. "They want to see the raw production data from the last shift. Make sure the logs they get match the revised checklist. If there are any discrepancies, you explain them as transcription errors. We cannot afford a finding on this contract." I asked what would happen if the raw data did not match. He said that was why I was handling the walkthrough. He said I had been with the company long enough to understand how these things worked. I told him I understood. He left without saying anything else. I stayed at my desk until after 6. Most of the office had emptied. I opened the archived project folder from 3 years ago that Victoria had mentioned. The efficiency report I had written was still there under my name in the metadata. A later version uploaded 6 weeks after mine had been renamed and credited to my boss in the summary line. The content was almost identical except for 2 paragraphs that had been moved to the front and reworded slightly. I downloaded both versions and the changelog. On my way out, I stopped by Andre's desk. He was still there finishing a report. I asked him whether he remembered the project from 3 years ago and who had actually run the data analysis. He said he remembered. He said the person who had done the work had left 6 months later after a similar performance write-up. He did not say the name out loud. I went home. I transferred the new recordings and the downloaded files to an encrypted folder on a separate drive. I did not label the folder. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. The next morning, the auditors returned at 8:05. I walked them through the production floor. My boss stayed 2 steps behind us the entire time. When the auditors asked about a particular data point that did not align with the revised checklist, I gave the answer my boss had instructed me to give. I said it was a transcription error that had already been corrected in the system. One of the auditors made a note, the other asked to see the original log entry. I said I would have to pull it from the archive. My boss stepped forward and said the current system version was the one that mattered for compliance purposes. The auditor looked at him for a long moment but did not argue. At 10:20, we returned to the conference room. The auditor said they would need one more day to complete their review and would deliver their preliminary findings on Friday morning. They thanked me for my time and left. My boss waited until they were gone before he spoke. You did what was necessary, he said. That's what matters. We'll handle the rest internally once they're gone. Deborah Lang was waiting in his office when we returned. She asked me to step inside and close the door. She placed a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of me. It was a formal performance improvement plan. The language was almost identical to the bullet points in the mistaken email I had seen 2 days earlier. She said I needed to sign it before I left for the day. She said it documented the concerns that had been raised during the audit and the expectations going forward. I read it once. Then I asked what would happen if I did not sign it. She said the company would proceed with the next steps in the disciplinary process. She did not specify what those steps were. I picked up the pen that was lying on the desk. I held it for several seconds without uncapping it. My boss stood by the window with his arms crossed. I set the pen down without signing. I'll need to review it with someone first, I said. Deborah Lang's expression did not change. She said that was my choice, but the timeline would not stop because I wanted a second opinion. I left the office. I did not go back to my desk. I walked straight to my car in the employee lot. I sat behind the wheel with the engine off and the windows up. I opened the voice memo app one more time and recorded the exact wording of the performance improvement plan and what Deborah Lang had said about the timeline. Then I drove home. That evening, I called Victoria Lane on her personal cell number. I had never called her outside of work before. She answered on the second ring. I told her I needed to know whether any of the archived files from 3 years ago had been altered or deleted in the last 48 hours. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she could check the access logs without leaving a trace on my account. She asked if I wanted her to do it. I said yes. She called me back at 9:47 p.m. She said 2 files had been accessed that afternoon using an administrative login. One was the efficiency report I had written. The other was the raw data set that supported it. Both had been opened but not downloaded. She said the login belonged to someone in HR. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table with the encrypted drive in front of me. The recordings from the audit meetings were still on my phone. The performance improvement plan was still unsigned in my work inbox. The client auditors would return in the morning for their final day. I had spent 7 years believing that if I kept the records accurate and did the work quietly, the facts would eventually protect me. They had not. The people who controlled the official version had simply changed the facts when it became inconvenient. I opened a new document on my laptop. I began typing a timeline that included every date, every email, every recording reference, and every conversation I could document. I did not add commentary. I did not describe how it felt. I listed only what could be verified. When I finished the first draft at 11:20 p.m., I saved it under a name that meant nothing to anyone else. I copied it to the encrypted drive. I did not know yet what I would do with it. I only knew that I was no longer willing to let the official record be the only one that existed. The auditors returned on Friday morning at 8 o'clock. They did not smile when they entered the conference room. James Reed, the lead auditor, placed a single sheet on the table. It listed 3 discrepancies between the revised checklist and the raw production logs from the night shift. He asked who had been responsible for reconciling those logs. My boss said the quality team had handled it. He looked at me. I placed my own folder on the table. It contained the timeline I had typed the night before, printed copies of the original emails I had sent, objecting to the shortcuts, the change log showing when the documents had been altered, and the 2 versions of the efficiency report from 3 years earlier. I had also transferred the voice recordings to a small USB drive. I set the drive next to the folder. I prepared this last night, I said. It covers the sequence of events from the initial instruction to skip the inspections through the revisions that were made after the fact. The recordings are time-stamped and include the conversations from Wednesday and Thursday. Deborah Lang reached for the folder. My boss stopped her with a small movement of his hand. James Reed picked up the timeline and read the first page. He asked if the recordings were of company meetings. I said they were. He asked if I had informed anyone that I was recording. I said I had not. He nodded once and passed the timeline to his colleague. Then he asked my boss whether the plant had any policy that prohibited employees from documenting their own work conversations. My boss said the concern was not the recordings themselves, but the selective presentation of information during an active audit. James Reed looked at him for several seconds without speaking. Then he asked to speak with me privately. My boss and Deborah Lang left the room. The door closed behind them. James Reed asked me how long the pattern of document revisions had been happening. I told him I had examples going back at least 3 years. I opened the older efficiency report and placed it beside the later version that had been credited to my boss. The metadata showed the original upload date and author. He asked what I wanted to happen. I said I wanted the record corrected and the people who had altered it held accountable for the decisions they had made. I did not say I wanted my job protected or my reputation restored inside the company. That would have been a different request. He said the audit findings would be submitted to the client by the end of the day. He said the discrepancies were serious enough that the client would likely request an independent review of the last 6 months of production data. He asked if I was prepared for what that review might uncover. I told him I had already prepared everything I had. He thanked me and said someone from his firm would follow up within the week. He did not ask me to sign anything. He did not tell me to stay or to leave. When he and his colleague left my boss and Deborah Lang returned, Deborah Lang placed the unsigned performance improvement plan in front of me again. "You still need to sign this," she said. "Refusing to sign does not stop the process. It only changes how we document your refusal." I looked at the paper, then I looked at my boss. "I'm not signing it," I said. "I've already given the auditors the original documentation. Anything else I sign now would contradict what they have." My boss's expression did not change. He said that was my decision. He said the company would respond accordingly. I stood up. I collected the remaining copies of my timeline and the USB drive. I walked out of the conference room and went straight to my desk. I did not stop to speak with Andre or anyone else. I opened my work email and composed a short message to the plant operations manager, Robert Klein, with the timeline document and the USB drive attached. I copied the corporate compliance address that was listed in the employee handbook. I did not add any explanation beyond the subject line, documentation timeline, and supporting files for client audit, Sarah Ellison. I sent it at 9:47 a.m. Then I opened a new email to Deborah Lang in HR. I typed a single sentence, "Effective immediately, I am resigning my position. My final day is today." I did not give 2 weeks' notice. I did not offer to help with transition. I sent it and logged out of the system. I packed the few personal items from my desk into a cardboard box I found in the supply closet. Andre watched from his station but did not approach. Victoria Lane walked past once on her way to the server room. She gave a small nod but said nothing. I carried the box to my car. The morning shift was already on the floor. The sound of the machines carried across the lot. I drove out of the employee entrance without looking back at the building. That afternoon, I received a call from Robert Klein. He asked if I was available to speak. I told him I was. He said the files I had sent had been reviewed by corporate. He said an internal investigation had been opened into the documentation practices on the defense contract. He said my resignation had been noted and that I would receive my final paycheck and any accrued leave by direct deposit. He did not ask me to reconsider. He did not offer any statement about my performance. He ended the call after confirming my address for the final paperwork. 3 weeks later, Andre sent me a message from his personal email. He said the client had postponed the next production run, pending the results of the independent review. He said 2 supervisors who had been involved in the revised checklist had been placed on administrative leave. He said Michael Stanton was no longer leading any new contract bids and that Deborah Lang had been reassigned to a different facility while the investigation continued. He said people in the office were talking about how often documents had been changed over the years and who had benefited from the changes. He did not ask what I planned to do next. He simply said the information had spread further than anyone had expected once the auditor's preliminary report reached the client. I did not reply to the message. There was nothing left to coordinate. I spent the next month updating my resume and applying for positions at other manufacturing companies in the region. I did not list the reason for leaving my previous role. I described the work I had done on process improvement and quality systems. When interviewers asked why I had left, I said I had decided it was time to look for an environment where documentation practices were more consistently enforced. One offer came through in early October. The new role was similar in scope, but at a smaller facility with stricter compliance protocols. I accepted it. The starting pay was lower than what I had been making and the commute was longer. I took it anyway. I did not hear from anyone at the old plant again. The investigation continued for several more months, according to what Andre occasionally passed along through mutual contacts. Michael Stanton eventually left the company. Deborah Lang remained in HR but was no longer involved in performance management for technical teams. The client contract was renewed under additional oversight requirements that included independent audits every quarter. I kept the encrypted drive in a drawer at home. I did not open it again after I started the new job. The recordings and the timeline had served their purpose. They had made the official record impossible to maintain without contradiction. I had spent 7 years believing that if I stayed quiet and did the work accurately, the facts would eventually protect me from the people who controlled the story. That belief had been wrong. The only protection the facts ever provided was the one I created by refusing to let their version be the only one that existed. Silence had never been neutral. It had only ever been convenient for the people who needed the record to stay the way they had written it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to decide whether staying silent was still the safer choice, I would be interested to hear what you chose and why.